Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called All Made by One Man, written by FarmWitch4275. I stood on the bridge of my ship, standing to attention as the face of the Emperor himself appeared on screen. A true honor for one of my low station, ship captain or not. I had my console in front of me, in arm's reach, making sure that I had everything on hand to show my Emperor my findings. Perhaps the most significant discovery we had ever made in the history of our civilization. The Emperor noticed my demeanor, and I knew I was going to be questioned about it later. "Captain Thraktar, report," he commanded. "We have found an anomalous planet, a precursor world. We have confirmed native life and have sent an expedition team to discover what went on. It's a world made by ancient humans," I said, plain and straightforward. This caused an audible gasp in the crowd from the revelation. "And how can you be certain it was made by humans? The ancient Terran Empire?" he asked. "We backtraced all the archaeological data we found over the centuries and matched several samples with what is present on the planet's surface. Similar style, similar manufacturer tools, use specific equipment, heavy and hand. We have also found examples of clothes, even an ancient sample of blood from what appears to be an accident, matched all known examples of human DNA spectrum. We can confirm with all the evidence this is in fact a human world." I replied calmly, my expression still unchanged. "I see. That works then. Can you tell me exactly why this planet requires you to defend it with an entire legion of my starships? It seems even for an ancient Terran world, the amount of force you have collected to protect it seems excessive." The Emperor's cold glare stared right into my soul. I said nothing and simply typed into my console. I simply showed him a view of high-flight drone footage. The color drained from his skin. The lights left his eyes as his jaw slowly became heavier. The more images I showed, the more silent he became. I also noticed the now deafening silence of the council as well. I stood calmly and waited for the montage of 32 images to pass by, each one a simple photograph of its incredible things we found on that verdant paradise world. Each one a marvel in itself. He finally spoke. Are these images real?" "I took them using a drone I piloted myself, so yes, they are definitely real. We even lost a drone to one. The pilot didn't believe something could exist. He thought maybe it was a hologram. Sneaky humans being sneaky. Stabbed into a wall of solid rock. I didn't think it necessary to punish him at the time. I couldn't believe half of what I was seeing either," I replied calmly. The Emperor used his own controls to zoom in on one particular image. He looked at it for a time, then glared back at me. "Is the star system secure?" "I'm waiting on supplies to build up a defense platform in the area. Besides the planet's surface, the system is completely unguarded," I replied calmly. "Is there any tech of note?" he asked. "Nothing of note that we can salvage or use. The rest is standard tech we use already, that we can't glean anything new from. The only thing that we have available that is worthy of concern appears to be broken or corrupted beyond repair. We don't go near. The last time we did it made it angry." I shivered slightly, recalling the events that transpired when one of the new recruits decided to poke a strange machine with his rifle. I see. How many are there? Not machines. I mean, how many of these magnificent things are there?" he asked, again his jaw barely registering his words. I simply reached down and typed something and showed him a picture of the largest continent. The entire planet was saturated in monuments, carved edifices, statues, and cities, each one more brilliant, beautiful, and intricate than the last. Each photo showed a close-up, as best we could given the resources of each monument, not fully encompassing the glory of the entire thing. The photo I showed him was the largest continent on the planet itself, containing no fewer than 82 of these monuments that appeared to be fully completed, and a further 32 that were incomplete or damaged in some way. There were 3 distinct construction styles used, with some monuments having all 3 styles. Some were almost entirely underground, their volume reaching down to around a mile underground. Some were carved out of mountains, entire hillsides and mountain cliffs, dug in to carve out an entire building, or in some cases an entire city. Other monuments were slightly above the average, As when there was no mountain to carve into, massive blocks of house-sized stone were carved out of something, assembled in rough shape of the monument's completed product, then meticulously carved out of the result. The Emperor looked through and picked 7 of these favorites. The first was a gigantic arena of some kind, 5 stories high, with large windows that channeled cooling winds to the structure. Some pulpits led to underground tunnels, with the structure itself digging 100 feet into the ground. All seats are empty and unusable, primarily because of the carved edifices of 2 giant figures engaged in combat in the arena. Stone of an impossible creature we know from human mythology as a dragon flying above the arena, while the imposing edifice of a creature known as a centaur is actively engaging in combat with it. Small details, such as a dragon's egg in the sand of the arena, flags waving in the invisible breeze on the rooftops, the ribs of a truly enormous dead creature poking through a part of the arena's walls, with thousands of partially charred, petrified skeletons lining the seats. The entire structure depicted the scene of a dragon that had nested in a colosseum after killing all of its occupants before being attacked by a giant horseman beast. "How is this possible?" he asked. The structure was assembled by stone blocks placed in a specific pattern, then carved piece by piece to form an arena. The 2 figures were likewise assembled, but there is a difference. Structures that appear to be built above ground, such as this dragon, are supported in the sky by human-made durasheet glass. That glass that almost all of our starships' viewing ports are made of. Some serious engineering calculations were done here. It's incredible. I tried to keep my calm, pointing out how one could see a shimmer from the glass supporting the structures. The most incredible thing about this was the structure was actually still traversable. The glass that held sculptures up had tunnels carved into it so one could move around to clean or maintain the structures. "Incredible! Using a transparent material as a support structure for the thing in the sky. Amazing. Is that the same with the Sky Island City thing, too?" "Yes. The entire thing is supported by a series of giant glass pillars. Shows you how strong the stuff is and why we use it pretty much everywhere, doesn't it?" I remarked calmly, as I started showing off the next one. "Indeed. What's the Sky Island City?" he asked. The picture came up and showed what was essentially a replica of a small urban city block during the 21st century. One small skyscraper, apartment block, and everything in between, all of it meticulously carved out of stone and cast metal. Interiors were included. It was a fully functioning city with a large wind turbine structure providing power. The entire thing was mounted on a huge island, floating in the sky, mounted on 6 gigantic 500-foot-high pillars made of the transparent steel glass. The entire structure was made to appear as if it had been freshly torn out of the ground. Pieces and parts of the ground made to appear as though they were disintegrating and falling to the ground. "Incredible! You say we can actually use these structures?" he asked. "Most of them have functional interiors and operable structural integrity, provided that we are careful when we actually live in most of them. This one, we actually learned a lot about life during the time period it represented. It's fascinating to see actual structures and not barren ruins. All in an elaborate piece of art," I replied calmly. The Emperor clicked on to the next one. The massive segment of ocean had been drained away and replaced by an enormous dome structure, which was empty of water, filled with air, connected to the surface by a dock that was bobbing around in the water above. The dominant figure of the structure was a huge aquatic temple, also accessible and traversable. We could easily live in it just like all the others. Its construction matched the descriptions for cartoon or childish versions of the thing called Atlantis. A massive hermit crab carved out of the rock, a giant shark suspended from the ceiling stalking a sailfish, a huge octopus encroaching on the city, and several enormous creatures called jellyfish, made out of stained or dyed glass. Each object wasn't supported by a pillar, but rather suspended from the ceiling by chains made from the transparent material. All of this surrounding by the ocean teeming with freshwater-based life. Everything was made or hollowed-out stone, with ladders, hidden elevators, and other things, all allowing anyone to actually use the suspended sculptures as a home to live in. Oh my! The people of Vestalia are going to enjoy this one. It's quite magnificent," the Emperor bellowed with glee. "Indeed," I replied. The Emperor started the next picture. It was a castle 15 square miles in size, a huge medieval castle with a Gothic construction style, dominated by a central arena and marketer area. The entire castle was built on a solitary island in the middle of the ocean, connected to the mainland by a massive stone-carved bridge that stretched for 25 miles. The castle's entrance via the bridge was dominated by two large statues of medieval kings, with a smaller, less dominant statue of a dragon dominating the roof of the temple or church structure. To the east side, connected to the ocean, was an elaborate gate structure with a large statue of a Lady of Justice, a common theme in modern architecture, we think, depicting a blindfolded robed woman carrying two scales, all leading down a huge staircase that contained a harbour town and the docks. Again, this place was big enough that we could live in it. It was a full city built on an island with high castle walls. The construction method for this one was a lot simpler than expected. Terrain flat, big rocks of stone, carved part, repeat. So precisely, we couldn't put a nanofiber rod between two rocks. It's the strangest but most beautiful thing we have ever seen. Each and every part of the castle meticulously placed stone by stone and fitted and carved to fit the overall design ideal. Incredible. This is about quality and nothing else, I explained. The Emperor scratched his chin, while nodding in agreement. His face was an expression of deep thought, as if the images were conjuring thoughts he never thought possible in his mind. What about this one? It's, disturbing. The next picture was an aerial shot of a graveyard or cemetery of some kind in a swamp-like area. A structure surrounded by a large mountain wall, with brick roads all combining to form an intricate pattern of graves, tombs, sepulchres, and small mausoleums. Dominating all of this, however, is a massive statue of a half-buried skeleton with green-dyed waterfall fountain spilling up from its mouth, holding an enormous multi-ton metal scythe. One hand at its side brandishing the farming tool, with the other hand outstretched, holding up an enormous eerie lantern, shaped like a human skull, glowing with a menacing green glow. The entire area was filled with rotting, dead trees and fallen woodlands. Well, they weren't dead. It was more like tree chosen exclusively for its lack of leaves during specific times of year. I won't answer any questions about this one. We don't go in there. It scares us, I stated sternly. The Emperor nodded in agreement again as he pulled up the sixth picture. This monument was carved out of the large cliffsides on the edge of the sea, a huge cove carved out of the rockside and embedded in the mountainside. The cliffs all had massive castles and statues carved out of the cliffs, each one more elaborate than the last. A huge bridge crossing from one edge of the cliff to the other across the cove entrance. The whole cliffside around the cove was covered in castles carved out of cliffs, each one going deep into the mountain. Dominating all of this, however, was a massive statue, the head of a woman wearing some kind of long headdress with a massive diamond marking its center, with two large horns. The statue depicted the woman with an expression of wonder, her right arm reaching out of the water to cradle her chin. The gemstone was a mixture of precious stones and gems embedded into a glass and amber. Magnificent, absolutely magnificent. Covered in vines allowed to rot, but nature taking over something beautiful makes it even more so. It was like it was almost created to copy the way nature takes over something forgotten. Beautiful, the Emperor gleefully said. We actually have a name for this one, and had a sign on it that said Agnoia Freighted. The damage the area sustained appears to be deliberate rather than natural. The collapsed bridge seems to be part of its design, I calmly explained. He nodded and went for the last one. This one is different. Beautiful. Seems to be more careful than the others. Yeah, this one is very different. This one appears to be meticulously carved. Evidence suggests that even the slightest of mistakes was treated with concern and months of work thrown away, judging by the quantity of debris around the site. But it is complete, and one of the largest and finest, I explained. This one was a massive monument of 7 enormous statues, based in a semicircle all facing the center, in which sits a massive tower atop which is its own smaller statue. Each statue is 100 feet in height, at least, the central tower 200 feet high. The statues are of a human woman in various extras, horns, antlers, tails, and stuff that we knew for a fact humans didn't have naturally, so this must have been some kind of fantasy. Each woman was posing on a pedestal, seat, or altar of some kind, each one in varying states of dress or undress. All of this built in the midst of a massive plains area, saturated in fertile, apparently still active farmland. The central tower is a perfectly, absolutely perfect, to the last micron level smooth cylinder, 16 feet wide, with an intricate pattern telling a story of conquest and dragons, probably related to the statues. The statue on the top of the tower is one of a human male, wearing what we identified as 21st century armor, relating to a branch of human police forces called SWAT, standing in a combat stance. The wall in and out is coated in a carved mural that was later carefully painted in thousands of small artworks, each one telling a part of the story that leads to the overall narrative surrounding the woman depicted in the statues. Each statue was painted to seem realistic in terms of skin tone and color for their fantasized species, the hair carved intricately out of stone and reinforced with metal plates, then painted to look realistic in a truly incredible manner. The statues were all sitting in an altar or pedestal in some way that conveyed a sense of calm, mysticism, or stoicism, no judgment or anger, expressions neutral or curious. The central statue was of a woman which human mythology described as an angel of some kind. She was depicted as wearing a floating cloak, reclining calmly while staring in wonder at something in the distance. A large halo floated above her head, made of solid metal and either painted or electroplated, we weren't sure, in gold. Chains, brooches, various jewelry items, and other such things were discarded at her feet or at her sides on the pedestal, the only jewel she wore being a small necklace with a strange emblem. The hair was not as we expected on closer inspection, each strand of the hair not being made of stone, but rather a long, thin metal cable that flowed freely in the wind, dyed in some still unknown way to appear it was actual hair as it flowed with the wind in the area. Her hair was bright gold, with highlights of white and silver. The most dominant part of the statues were their two wings jutting out from the statue's back, painted with brilliant white, with each of the thousands of feathers made the same way the hair was made, dyed with brilliant white. To the left, the second statue, this one of a young woman wearing an exceedingly questionable outfit, if that even qualified, sitting on a bed-like altar covered in silk pillows. This one was depicted as a creature known as a succubus in mythology. Staring straight at the central pillar, she was positioned such that her large bat-like wings were off to one side, sitting seductively on the pedestal while simply looking at the central pillar, in a manner we determined was more calm and peaceful rather than sexual. This one's hair was oil black like the night sky, and her wings were purple and black in color, with her clothing sharing a similar motif. Two large horns, one slightly smaller than the other, jutted out from the top of her head. Arranged around her, on the bed she sat on, were various items, not becoming of a creature associated with lust, but rather items such as paintbrushes, canvases, and paint cans. The statue to the left of the structure was that of a creature known through mythology as a dryad. This one depicted a being in a state of post-mourning, an expression of peace and serenity, as she sat on a large log-like seat, covered in vines and leaves. The statue had large horns jutting from her head that looked like tree branches rather than antlers, countless flowers in her dark green hair, and her skin itself was a mixture of skin-like texture, painted green, and a bark-like texture, painted like oak wood. Surrounding her seat were various creatures, not wild or dominant predators, but rather prey animals and farm creatures, such as rabbits, cows, and dogs and cats. Growing to her right side was a small vineyard plantation, as well next to a small pond. She bore the expression of weight on her shoulders, her eyes looking at the base of the tower in serenity. The statue on the far side, next to the dryad, was of a creature known as a devil or demon, or some kind of creature associated with evil. She sat calm on a spiky altar of some kind, wearing almost nothing compared to the other statues, but still enough that we never had to censor the broadcast of the pictures. This one's skin was uniform, but painted a smooth, slightly reflective pale blue. 4 horns jutted from her head, 2 small ones underneath 2 larger, more prominent ones colored a shade of oil black. Her wings were enormous, so big they slipped behind the dryad statue in size, but it seemed to complement the design. Each wing was leathery in appearance, but had small downy feathers mixed in with the joints and the wing edge. Her hair was a dark blue in color, each strand built in the same way the others were, meticulously, with an almost obsessive need for detail. She was depicted as reclining comfortably, looking at the central pillar with an expression of safety or comfort, as if she had nothing to be scared of. Her altar was covered in piles of gold coins, some of which were disorganized, rusted, or forgotten. To the right of the angel, bearing a cheeky, some would say happy smile, was a creature known by modern mythology as a beastkin, in this case a reindeer. Sort of strange fantasy creatures that have mismatched components of various animal species bolted onto them. This one was a female wearing a fur coat of some kind, depicted sitting on a stone altar in the midst of a snowy forest. She sat calmly, one hand at her side, the other hand holding a large, bright red ornament of some kind that was a fancy gilded ball with a ring on it. The woman had large deer-like antlers coming from her head, her human-shaped nose painted to look like it was glowing red slightly, and if checking behind her, a short, cute, fluffy tail. Long, dark, mahogany wood-colored hair flowed across her shoulders, again, each strand made of a single cable, painted and somehow dyed. She was depicted as having a cheeky smirk, like she knew something the viewer didn't. Her altar was coated in white and blue, signifying snow or ice. The next one to the right was that of a woman with hair of fire and flame, wreathed in an envelope of fury and fire. Her hair was depicted as being unruly or wild, painted to look like a fire of some kind flowing in the wind. The altar in which she sat looked similar to the caldera of a volcano, as if she was a giant goddess of flame taking a rest on a throne of magma. The altar itself took up most of the depiction, being a giant wrangling serpent of flame and fury. Her expression, however, was that of calm, quiet, looking with curiosity at the central tower as if she was trying to understand something. This was a creature known in mythology as a pyromancer, or fire elemental of some kind. Finally, the last statue was of the mythical creature known as a fairy or fae. Large bug-like wings jutting from her back, these ones made of massive quantities of stained glass to create the illusion of semi-transparent butterfly wings with soft pink hue. She wore no clothing. Instead, this one's body was covered in a series of vines and flowers that carried massive roses, daisies, and lavender fronds, giving the illusion of a dress made of flowers. Her hair flowed freely, a color of soft pine wood and pink gemstone or quartz in hue. She was depicted with an expression of exhaustion and quiet, the kind of expression one would exhibit after a hard day's work as she sat on her altar, one of mix of stone and wood. Her altar had many statues around it, ones of broken items such as weapons or tanks, overgrown with flowers and vines. But the most striking thing about each statue were the eyes. Each one not a solid ball of glass, but an eyeball made entirely of synthetic gemstones, probably hundreds of tons worth. Each one arranged to copy the perfect pattern of a human eye, veins and all. Each statue having its own color: sapphire blue, onyx black, amethyst purple, pyrite gold, emerald green, amber yellow, and ruby red. My emperor looked at me quizzically. "Isn't this some kind of reference to the concept of the 7 deadly sins? It looks like it. I mean, these are just absolutely phenomenal, but I can see how it works." "We think so. It seems to be the case, though what the central pillar with the police officer says about the piece, I have no idea. In any case, a truly obscene quantity of work went into these statues. We did, however, find a plaque that describes the scene, however. We don't know what it says. This is Latin, the language of the kings. We aren't actually allowed by law to translate it. That's, kind of the reason why I called you for this," I said, and showed the picture of the plaque. The emperor read it and smiled, a strange, knowing smile, a smile that made me simultaneously proud and scared all at once. "Bah! It says, 'Behold the 7, neither sin nor virtue, once wild, now tamed, once feared, now treasured, temperance, above indulgence,'" the empress said. I heard that and thought about it for a minute or two, and then it hit me like a brick. "Okay, now I get it," I said, slapping my head in a gesture we had become used to copying from the humans. "You do? Well, let's see if you do. Explain," the emperor commanded. "The angel is pride. The discarded jewelry and simple clothing stands as minimalism, for her expression roughly translates to looking outward, not inward," I explained. Go on, go on." "The reindeer girl represents gluttony. We know how it left unchecked. Wild animals will eat absolutely everything, collapsing the local area's ecosystem. She represents moderation. The fact that she is a reindeer means that she has something to do with giving, or basically the opposite of gluttony. Feeding others as well as the self, I said, looking at the Emperor for validation of my theory. He nodded. Quite astute. Continue. The succubus obviously represents lust, but her expression and demeanor are similar to that of a happy housewife or calm mother, rather than a demon of pleasure, which means she represents lust, tempered and controlled by love. The fairy is representative of sloth. She doesn't look lazy. She seems to be positioned in such a way to convey exhaustion, carry an expression of a job well done, rather than not wanting to do a job. Like she's relaxing after a hard day, I said. Very good, very good. Last three, come on. You can do it, he said, talking more like a universal professor than an emperor. The fire elemental represents wrath, obviously. But the snake, I don't know. Maybe the snake represents control over her fury or something, I think. The dryad represents envy, I think. The serenity and submission in her expression and pose, when literally overshadowed by the wing of another statue, shows a sign of temperance. The flowers in Vineyard obviously state she's more interested in her own works rather than others. And the blue devil represents greed, or at least what it once was. Her attire, if you can call it that, is the only thing about her that is considered expensive. Well, a lot of gemstones, jewels, and coins surrounding her altar are dusty or broken. It shows a semblance of greed, but within reason, meaning she still likes gold, but only enough of it. Did I get that right? I asked. Very well done. You summed it up quite nicely. Yes, this does match the description on the statue's base. It effectively tells the mythical story of a man, presumably the statue depicted on the top of the pillar, set out to conquer the 7 deadly sins, but ultimately ended up tempering them instead, calming them down. The entire piece represents the concept of moderation and control. Don't hump everything, don't steal, find pride in others, etc. An extraordinarily complex way to convey an extremely simple concept. A concept simply stated as, do it, but not too much. I want full scans of it done as soon as possible. I need full reproductions of this work sent every corner of the empire, not just because it's good lesson to teach, he commanded. At your command, I have just one point of contention for this entire scenario. I have to tell you, I promised to not tell, but at this point I think there's nothing I can do about it. You'll find out one way or another, and I would like to avoid treason charges, so, yeah, I said, and started to type on my console to bring up one final photo. What's this about? One thing we've encountered about this planet is one simple factor. The grooving is too precise, the tool marks are too exact. Every pattern appears to be unique, but made in a uniform way. In essence, every single one of these monuments, my Emperor, was constructed by a single individual, I said. You cannot be serious. It would have taken thousands of years to build these. And you are telling me that this is the work of one man? He bellowed. How do you know for certain? Well, 2 reasons. Firstly, we have a lot of tech from both us and the ancient Terrans that allowed us to determine who did what and how down to the last molecule. And second of all, I pressed a button on the console and showed a new picture. It was a picture of me, standing next to a smiling, happy human wearing a heavy mason's outfit, carrying a hammer and chisel. Before I started giving my report, I had a beer with the guy who made them. Say hi to Kevin, I said, my face suddenly contorting into a smug smirk. My crew, the Emperor, the Council, and everyone on audible range, and everyone who could see that picture gasped audibly and so heavily it felt like they had sucked in the atmosphere out of the room in shock. Kevin is a Terran, living, breathing, ancient human, I said. The Emperor gasped deeper and harder. A human that has been alive for the last 2,000 years or so, working on everything you see on this planet, by himself, I said. The Emperor starting to hyperventilate, to hysterics. And he said that it was okay to visit, so long as you don't damage anything and don't litter. The Emperor collapsed from his chair in a full-blown hysterical breakdown, desperately trying to breathe in oxygen as I played a video of Kevin showing me how he made his special statue paint. I closed the broadcast and sat back in my seat. The crew looked at me with an expression of, I don't know how to describe it. I simply shrugged my shoulders and said, but Kevin said that it would be funny. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.